Doing research into the evolution of otters was stupid. Not because it was boring or uninteresting, but rather because there's so little information that's readily available and not locked behind a paywall of some kind. This is actually a common issue in the scientific research of any kind that you're doing. And usually, when you do find information you can access, it's either outdated or written in a way that requires you to have a PhD in the subject and a master's in the language it's written in order to understand that it's telling you otters live in or near water. Well, if I am anything, it's stubborn. And I wasn't going to let this stop me from finding out as much information as I could, which was probably not good for my stubbornness, because now I have to issue a correction on that first video I made for Ottober. The closest living relatives of otters are not badgers in the subfamily Melinae. It's the subfamily Mustelinae, which are ferrets, weasels, and minks. You can still call them water badgers, though, because water badger don't care. Now that I have that out of the way, let's get into this. Otters first diverged from other mustelids somewhere in the ballpark of 22 to 23 million years ago. We know this through genetic analysis. While the process to do this is relatively simple, it's incredibly complex and wordy to explain, so I won't. Fortunately, we have fossils that date back to the time period, so there is no reason to dive into it, is what I want to say. The unfortunate truth is that it's hard to determine the difference between early otters and other members of the mustelid family purely based on fossils. There is confusion on whether or not the fossils are badgers, weasels, or even pangolins, which aren't even mustelids. What we can say, with a degree of certainty though, is that the first thing to evolve was dentition. With most animals, we can't see the soft tissue that would normally have evolved relatively quickly, like the webbing of the feet, but we can determine the kind of diets the creatures had through their teeth. And this is one of the key signs for otters as they evolved to eat things like crustaceans, mollusks, fish, all those small little river and water things. A primary diet consisting of those things require your teeth to be designed to crack into them or catch and hold them. So let me get into the leading theory of how otters evolved. Their early ancestors would use shallow waterways as a source of easily accessible food, much like how mink do today. This leads to adaptations to being able to move in the shallow pools fairly easily, as well as the adaptations of their teeth. They would also use these pockets of water to escape from predators. This leads to better adaptations in their webbed feet for swimming, as well as increased lung capacity. The increased lung capacity leads to being able to dive deeper to exploit more food resources in the water. And here you end up with effectively an infinite loop, causing a feedback cycle on evolution towards watery conditions. New adaptations for aquatic life, pushing that adaptation into new territory for better resources, so on and so forth, yada yada yada. But in all but one case, we never saw otters lose their adaptations for living on land. This tells us that otters had a need to exploit the water for food, but still required the ability to travel across land to get to new resources. Imagine this as they've fully exploited everything in one water system, and so they have to move across the way to get to the next one because it doesn't connect up by a river or a lake or the ocean. Let me get off into a tangent real quick, okay? So otters, we know, started their evolutionary process somewhere in Eurasia, whether or not that is Asia proper in terms of like China, Thailand, and all of that Southeast Asia area, or if it were in Europe proper. We're not exactly certain because there's a lot of fossils that date from that time period in both areas. But what we do know is that from that initial evolutionary point, it split from Enhydriodon to Lutra, which the Lutra genus is what most likely went off into North America to become the Lontra genus. And as it went and split, it became the Pteronura, and you have Enhydra that came off from it. Enhydra most likely started its evolutionary path in Asia and then moved off and across. With regards to what happened with then moving into Africa, you certainly saw that the Enhydriodon genus went and moved into Africa proper, and where they became. We'll talk about them later, right? But you also had the split for Lutra into Aeonics, which is one of the other major branches for the history, which is one of the other major branches. And there they went and they populated all throughout Asia for the most part and moved off into Africa. The Lutra branch in Europe went and split off to become Hydrictis and Lutra. Hydrictis is what gives us the spot-necked otter, which they're so cute to look at. Anyways, small little tangent aside, let's move on. Now, this is where I get into the nitty-gritty of the different fossils we found and the interesting tidbits of information we've been able to glean over the years. In the late Miocene, somewhere around 5 to 8 million years ago, otters underwent rapid evolution and diversification. What little information I've been able to gather suggests that there was a split within the genus Enhydriodon that eventually gave rise to all of the genus of otters that we have living today, starting with the genus Lutra. One of the earliest members of the genus Enhydriodon is Enhydriodon dicake. It's fun. It's a stupid name. Anyways, while it's probably safe to assume that the early otters were around the same size as otters we have today, most of the ones that I can find information on are large. Dicake is often cited as being the same size range as a lion or a bear, but it has an even bigger cousin, Enhydriodon omoensis. Omoensis weighed in excess of 400 pounds, and unlike other otters at the time, had adaptations that suggested it wasn't an aquatic species. What's even more interesting, though, is that it coexisted with our early ancestors and most likely saw them as prey. Large otters seem to be a hallmark of the Miocene. In addition to Enhydriodon of Africa, you also have San Miguel Melilutra of China, whose species name means badger otter, and Enhydrotherium terranova of North America. And while those two didn't reach the same size as their African cousins, they were still large in comparison to modern otters. Breaking 100 pounds wouldn't be an issue for them, but it's more than double the average of the sea otter, which is the largest species of otter today. While most of the species that we know of today would have started to evolve in the same time as these giants, they weren't able to really flourish until the giants died out in the end of the Pliocene, somewhere around 2.5 million years ago. The reason for them going extinct? Most likely climate change. The Pleistocene that followed is often referred to as the Ice Age, and a lot of the megafauna of the Miocene and Pliocene died off, opening ecological niches for smaller mammals to fill. And in our story here, it's the modern otters that swam up on top. Well, hey, I hope you enjoyed that little tidbit going into the depths of otter evolution, where they came from, where they ended up, and you know how big they ended up. They're massive. Anyways, if you enjoyed this kind of content, I hope you like, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff. And let me know what you want to know about otters. I'm really curious because I am a treasure trove for it. I hope. Anyways, I'll see you next time.